Hello and welcome to a tutorial video on Kiko's knitting podcast. Today I'll show you how to knit the Rio Calina Cowl. It's a little cowl, as you can see, is knit in a 2x2 rib and has cables. The pattern is a free pattern by Cat Body. I think most of you will have known Cat Body, who was a fantastic designer who passed away last year. And this is one of her free patterns. The pattern calls for about 200 grams of worsted weight yarn that have about 360 yards. So I am using a yarn that's a bit thinner. It's a DK weight yarn by Hansa Farm. It's called Alpaca. It's a pure baby alpaca. And the pattern calls for a 4.5 millimeter needle, and that is what I am going to use, even though the yarn calls for a 3 to 4 millimeter needle. As I'm a very tight knitter, I'm sure this is going to be a nice cowl that way, and even if it comes out a little smaller, I don't mind. The pattern asks you to cast on 64 stitches and then do about ½ inch of knit to purl to without any cabling. So this is the beginning where I just knit and purl the stitches without any cables, but then you start with the cables, and this is going to be the main topic in today's video, to show you how to do those cables. And this pattern is also very good for beginners who've never knit cables before, because the cables in this pattern are really easy. And one of the reasons it's so easy is because you are not told when and where to cable your stitches. So normally with a normal cable pattern, you have to count your stitches and count your rows and make sure that all the cabling happens in the right place. But with this pattern, you have the complete freedom of putting cables in whenever and wherever you like. This is rather unusual, but that makes it really easy for beginners because you never have to count, except for while you cable, but you can just choose freely where you put your cables. For those of you who've never done a cable before, the only trick is that you knit the stitches in the wrong order. So with the next 8 stitches, I will start knitting stitches numbers 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I'll do 1 to 4. And how to do that, I'm going to show you in a minute. When you do a cable, you can choose whether you put the stitches that you knit later to the front or the back of your work. With this pattern, that you can choose freely again. The only thing that the pattern tells you to do is which stitches to put on your cable needle. I'll show you how to do that, and then later I'll talk about alternatives. So, to change the order of your stitches, you have to get the first 4 stitches out of the way so that you can knit stitch number 5. And that's why you put the 4 needles onto a cable needle. I have brought several cable needles, or several needles that you can use to make cables. This is like a classic cable needle that's being used in Germany. But this is a typical Japanese cable needle, which I rather like. And what I also like is to use a plastic needle because it's lighter than the metal. This is a rather odd needle that came as part of a book that I bought. You can just use a double-pointed needle if you use double points anyway. Especially if you have shorter ones, they're really good. This is a needle by the German company Kiko. They made cable needles that way, and then later had the idea to use 3 of those to knit socks with. And this is part of one of those sock needle sets. But why not use it again as a cable needle, because that was their original idea. And then I brought this needle, which looks straight, but you can form it. You can make any form of cable needle you like with this, which I think is rather funny, and especially for people like me who like to play around. this is quite nice. You can leave it straight if you want, but yeah, it can be anything you like. I'll start with this more traditional needle and I show you how to do that. So the stitches 1, 2, 3, 4 will be knit later, and Kat Body says to start with a purl stitch. So 1 purl stitch, then 2, 3 are knit stitches, and number 4 is another purl stitch. And I'll leave them in front of my work. So that's easier for you to see. And now I grab my yarn and I'll do numbers stitches 5. Stitch 5 is a purl stitch, 6 and 7 are knit stitches, and stitch number 8 is another purl stitch. And I want to keep knitting knit 2 purl 2, so after purling this 1 stitch, it's a good thing there's a purl stitch on my cable needle. So I'll grab the cable needle without turning it around, and I don't knit it, I'll purl the stitch and then knit the 2 next stitches, and then the last stitch is a purl stitch again. And then when I look at my left hand needle, I will notice there's another purl stitch, so I am in the same rhythm of knit 2 purl 2 the whole time. And this is where I changed the order of the stitches, and they do look a bit squashed up a bit, and you might think it looks wrong, but don't worry. You always have to knit a few rows on top of those stitches, and then you can decide whether or not you like your cable. So now I just continue in the set pattern, and as we are free to put cables any place we like, I could just finish the row if I wanted, or I can put 1, 2 or 3 cables in there any way I like. So what I like is to do another cable right now, and I will put the stitches to the back of the work just to show you. And I'm using this needle by Kiko and show you why this form is really very handy. So I'll come from the back because I want to park the stitches in the back. I'm putting 4 stitches onto the needle, and it doesn't matter that the needle is a lot thinner than my working needle, because with this needle I'm not going to knit stitches. I'll just leave the stitches there and I'll knit the stitches off the needle, so it doesn't matter what size it is. If the cable needle was bigger than my working needle, it's a bit hard to get the stitches on, but thinner is always very handy. So I'll leave the stitches to the back of my work, and I can purl a stitch, knit 2 stitches and purl 1 stitch. And then I grab my cable needle, and when I push them on with one end, and then I knit them off the other end so I don't twist them in any way. So now I have to purl a stitch again, knit 2 stitches. Always take care that your left hand needle doesn't lose any stitches. That can happen. So the last stitch is a purl stitch. I can put the cable needle away and I can continue on my row, and there's another purl stitch, and then I can continue in my pattern. Anyone who knows more of my videos knows that I like to knit the last stitch and slip the first stitch, but with this project I decided to purl the last stitch, so I stay in pattern, and then when I slip the first stitch I will have this nice edge that kind of looks like a tiny I-cord, but it's sort of in keeping with the knit 2 purl 2 pattern, and I think that looks really nice with this pattern. Now with the wrong side row, we do not put any cables, we just knit the knits and purl the purls, and I am going to show you the difference between the front and back in a minute. Normally when I knit a cowl I like to do it circular, so I don't have to sew anything, so I like to knit it in the round. But with this pattern there is a certain idea why we knit it flat, and that's because we sew it together in a very certain way at the end. If you you can look up the pattern, you can see how it works, but I am going to make another video later to show how that is being done. If you wanted to knit the beginning and the end of your knitting together to form a tube, we could have started with a provisional cast on, but as I said, this pattern is made up differently. We are going to knit about 110 centimeters, and if we just sewed beginning and end together, it'd be fairly long, but we are going to have a cowl that's fairly tight around your neck, and that's because we will sew together the sides of the beginning and the end, but that's hard to explain. I will show that in a later video. So this beginning will not be part of the seam. So now you can see this is one of the cables I just made. It already looks a lot nicer than it just did. It's not quite as tight anymore. That was the other cable. Still a bit tight, but not too bad. But what you can see is on this side, the two knit stitches, they always stay together. And it looks like a really nice and proper cable, depending. But now when I turn it around, all the cables look a lot different. And that's because we always, the two purl stitches were torn apart. So on this side, it's the knit stitches that are torn apart. So if you look at those knit stitches, one stitch goes underneath and the other goes up. And that's why the cables look completely different. And that's what Cat Bawdy wanted. She wanted two distinct sides. And that's because of the way she sews it together later. It will fold over like this, and you will always show both sides of the cowl at the same time, and then you can see the difference of both sides, and depending on how you wear your cowl, you can decide which side you show more. Now if you don't want the sides to be different, and spoiler alert, I'm going to knit it as per pattern, but my sister, who wants to join the knit along, I don't know if I've said that it's going to be a knit along, but she doesn't like to have different sides, so she wants to knit it in a way that both sides look the same. And that you can have if you do not start with a purl stitch that you put on your cable needle, but if you start with if you put two knit stitches and then two purl stitches on your cable needle, then you knit two, purl two, and then you knit two, purl two from your cable needle, then you never part those two stitches, and that means that the cables on both sides of your cowl will look the same. So that's how you do that if that's the effect you go for. Now I want to put another cable in. Oh, I'll show you this funny needle. This has a short and a long end, so you have to decide which side you start with, and I would recommend, if you have a needle like that you start off with the short end. I'll show you why in a minute. So I put the purl stitch and two knit stitches and a purl stitch onto this short end of the needle. I leave it to the front, and again I push it to this round bit so that the needle is really safe, it won't slip out, and then it's out of the way for doing the next 4 stitches. And now once I've done that, I grab the needle and I have to push the stitches to the other end of the needle, and that means that now I have the long part of the needle to knit off from, and that's what I think is a bit more comfortable for working. So I purl my stitch, and again have to take care of the left hand needle. If it goes, sometimes the stitches come to the front too much. Make sure you don't lose the stitches, and then I knit the stitches off the cable needle, put it away. I've done my cable, and I will just finish the row. And you don't have to put a cable in every row. You could knit 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 rows without cabling, and then put another cable, or 3, however you like it. And Kat Body, I think in her pattern says, let the river carry you, and you can just, yeah, see what your creativity wants you to do, how you feel that day. And then one end of the cowl can have loads of cables and the end can have very few, or the other way around. If you're just starting out, you can start with a few cables and then increase them as you go. But that means that every cowl that you knit from this pattern will look different than everybody else's cowl. So every cowl is going to be unique. When you put a cable pattern, if you use a one color yarn, it's the cables show off better. You know, I like to knit with opal yarn, which is usually very colorful. It might hide the pattern a bit, but on the other hand, as you can put the cables the way you like and you don't have to see the pattern properly, maybe it's be a nice idea to use a multicolor yarn as opal produces them. I think one day I'll try that. So once you've done your strip, that's about 110 centimeters. Kat Body recommends to do about half an inch of just ribbing without cables, and then you cast off by using Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast off. But I will show that in the other video that I am planning to do once I finish my knitting. I hope you've learned that it's not difficult to put cables in your knitting. I hope you like the idea and this pattern. I hope that a lot of you will join the knit along. Yeah, and I hope you will enjoy your cowl if you knit one. And because you don't have to count your stitches or rows and you can just put the cables whenever, wherever you like, I hope you will just go ahead and try that. And there are so many different ways or so many different needles you can use for your cables. I'm sure you will find something. So with the double pointed needles, it may be a bit more cumbersome because the needle may be in the way. I think I'll just quickly show you how to do that. But I hope that this video will show you that you don't have to be afraid of cables. Yeah, so with my cowl, I think the first 2 knit stitches I will not cable, just to have an edge that's a bit more straight. Now I'm going to use the big heavy metal double pointed needle. I think it's about the same size as my working needle, and now I will push the stitches onto the middle of the needle so they won't slide off while I knit my other stitches. And yeah, it's a bit in the way, but it's not too bad, and if you try a bit, I'm sure you can make it work. So make sure you have the yarn in front of the needle for the purl stitch, and then you just do the other stitches, put it to the side, and then you can continue knitting. So sometimes the cables look a bit funny if you cable to the same direction twice in a row, but it doesn't matter. There's no wrong or right with this pattern. So you can just enjoy the knitting, enjoy the cabling, and yeah, be happy knowing you knit something unique. I hope you understood everything I said. I hope it helped you to cable your stitches, and I hope that we will have a lot of Rio Calina cowls in the end. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye!